Okay, so what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be taking our interface that we built already with the subscription manager contract, and we're going to be making it look much better. To start out with, just so you guys can follow along at home, I'm just going to, right now I'm in my htdocs folder. This is where on Ubuntu anyway, you would put your web docs that you want to load with by going to localhost. So if you go here, you can see I have a couple of folders there. You can see them here as well. So the first thing I want to do is clone the repos that we'll be using, and I'm gonna be using something from the seminar source code. That's what we've been working on, and we're gonna be using this simple Ethereum dapp template as a reference. So I'm gonna go ahead and clone both of those real quick, and it's quite easy. Just copy the link address and say git clone and paste, enter, okay. And do the same thing with this guy. Git clone and paste, enter. Okay, now if we refresh this, we'll see two new folders. This seminar source code, if we go to week 2 here and subscription manager interface, that is what we've already built, and you can see it's working. I can click create new, so that works all pretty well. And then if I go back here now and I click on, go back one more, and one more, and then I go to Simply Ethereum dapp. This is the styling we're going to move towards. So here we have functionality, but it's very bland, visually. And here's a really much better visual, but it's mostly functionally empty. It does have these warnings that work. It's telling me I'm on the Ropsten network, which is a nice thing we'll be importing. But anyway, we're going to be taking this interface and moving it over to our functional web interface here. Okay, so looking at these structures of these what we've got here, of course, seminar source code, we really want to look at the week 2. Everything that we've been working on is all in one file here, and that's been fine so far, but we're going to be adding CSS too. So then we'll have sort of 3 different things working. We'll have the HTML, the JavaScript, and the CSS, and at that point it starts to make more sense to split the file up. And if we look at the simple Ethereum dapp template, you can see that's how this is built, and this is definitely the more conventional, professional approach to building a web page. Is that you would have your index.html, and you'd have some libs, these are all JavaScript, and you'd have your JavaScript code, you'd have the CSS, kind of all split up nicely into different files. So the first thing we're going to do is look at the file structure here and sort of implement that on our subscription manager interface here, and just make sure everything still works after we've done that structural change. Okay, so the first thing I did here is under week 2 we used to have a subscription manager interface.html. Instead, I created a folder with that name, and then I renamed the our main page, which used to just be subscription manager interface.html. I just named it to index.html, and I put it in this folder here. And if you've done any web development before, you'll know that means that if I go to a folder here and I just go into this folder, it'll automatically load the index page. And then furthermore, I went into the index. I took all of well, first of all, you can see it's much smaller, and that's because I took all of the JavaScript code out. I'm also going to take out these comments while we're here. We don't really need these. These are left over. And so now we don't even need to scroll to see the whole file. So that's pretty cool, although I'm sure that will change as we move along here. But anyway, I took the JavaScript and I put it into 2 JavaScript files here in the JS. I did the index.js, which is all of our logic, and then I made a separate one called contract info. And that just holds the ABI and the address of the contracts that we're working with, and that makes it a little easier to find. And also, it's nice if you're working with others, because you can just point them directly to this file, and then they have all that they need to interact with your contract. And then I suppose finally I went into index and I actually added the inclusions there to actually include those 2 files. And yeah, and then I was able to reload it, and it still works even though we split the files up, so that is all great. Yeah, so next what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to start putting in some CSS here. This folder is empty. I'm going to be taking the CSS from this, and yeah, we'll see how that goes. Okay, so just what I did just now is really simple. I just copied the index CSS into our own CSS folder on this. Again, this is our project up here. This one down here is what we're using as a reference. So I just took this index file, I threw it up in our CSS. I went into the index and I added a reference to it right here. I also added this reference up here. This is just to Bootstrap, which we'll use a little later. Well, we might already be using, but interestingly, as soon as I put this reference in, it changed the styling of our page, and now it definitely looks worse in a way, but you can see some of the styling's already taking place. And then, of course, it kind of bites us in the butt here when we're trying to put regular text down on this dark blue background. But we will work through that now. But you can see it's interesting already just by, and again, this is the power of CSS here, is that just by putting in this file here, and I'll go over here, I'll go over this in just a second, but by putting in this file and then including it into our index, it already sort of affects the whole page and different elements. For example, you can see that this header has its own color, our buttons look a little bit different, so yeah. Okay, now actually looking at this index.css, there's some stuff. Well, first of all, I'm just going to remove a couple things. So I'm going to remove an event log because we don't have any events in this dapp. Well, we do in the contract, but we haven't really worked them into the interface, so I'm just going to take that out. I'm also going to take out this. This has to do with a custom scroll bar that we're not going to be using. And all this stuff here, it's nice functionality if you guys ever want to use it. It lets you define different defaults for different things based on the screen size. So this is saying if the media has a max width of this, and if the media has a different max width, then you can do different things. You can see, for example, each of them redefine the H1 font size. So, but I'm going to take that out just to make this file simpler. And the reality with Web3 right now is that really only desktop users are dependable because they're the only ones that have access to MetaMask, and there really is not a good mobile solution. Anyway, so just looking through some of this stuff, let's take off this weird empty line here. You can see this H1 and H2 is a good example. If we go and look at our page here, this is the H1 header, and I'll just go show you real quick in the HTML code. Here's H2, here's an H1, so subscription manager interaction, and that's this right there. And so the fact that that's yellow actually comes from the CSS right here, H1 color here, and it also changes the font size, makes it bold. And then H2 makes the color white, which is the whole reason we can even see these headers as opposed to this regular text that we can't quite see. What else in here? Let's see here. Warnings, this defines some styling for the warnings. The fact that it's preceded by a period here means we're talking about a class, and not these are talking about specific HTML elements, and these are talking about, I believe, a class. If we go back to if we go look at our reference here, let's go find the warnings there. And remember the warning, this is a warning up here, so that's what it's talking about, and this is our reference template. And if we go to go here, we can find warnings. See, class equals warnings, and so everything in here is going to get that these styling type stuff. So and all we do here is just redefine the margins, and that's why we have a little bit of space up here, because there's a margin top of 40 pixels. If we made that 0 and refresh this page, this thing would move up. So that's what CSS does. It defines these nice global stylings for different things, and yep. Okay. Okay, so first of all, I should say I'm going to start keeping these the window split here. I'm going to have our reference file. This is the template that we're grabbing stuff from over on the right here, and on the left here I'll have our files, so what we're actually changing. So I haven't been doing that so far, but that's how I'll do it from now on. Now what I've just done is I've gone and if you look at this, there's this warning system that is really nice. that gives us some nicely formatted warnings if we're on the wrong network or if we have MetaMask locked. And so I needed to copy the HTML that generates that and then the code that actually triggers it. So I went over to our, if we go and look at our index.html here from our template that we're copying from. Here are the it's one div with warnings, which is made up of two smaller divs, each with a different warning. They each start with a hidden equals true, and you guys can look at the rest of this if you'd like. But and then secondly, from our template, we have this is the JavaScript code that actually shows the warnings, the whole warnings div, and then the specific warning that it wants to show. Based on whether the net ID is not 1, which means it's on the wrong network, or whether there is no accounts in this this array here, which indicates that the user has not unlocked their MetaMask. So so I just pulled both of those over. Here I put the warnings div right in here. I didn't change anything else. I didn't edit anything else. I mean, I changed the indents, I suppose. And then here, I'll just go down, I'll just Control Z so you can see what we did have. This is what we had before and what we've written earlier in the week, where it actually changed something in the app. And I went ahead and replaced that pretty much straight with this code here, which it doesn't go through our view instance. It just changes the stuff directly through jQuery, but that works for our purposes. And then I just took out a single line here that we're not using anymore because we're not going through the app. And then now, so if we go here, we have the warnings here, and I'll just show you how those work really quick. My MetaMask, it says I'm on Ropsten to make a to interact with a real contract, go to the main network. So if I go to main and refresh, that warning will go away. Additionally, I'm going to go back to Ropsten, and I'm also going to sign out here. So now if I refresh, it'll tell me not only am I on the Ropsten, but I'm also not even signed in, and it tells me, you know, the consequence of that. So those are just nice things to include in any dapp. And yeah, so now if I refresh, that one should go away. Yep, there it went away. Yeah, okay, so moving on. Another quick note is that just as of this last change I went over where I've added the warnings in, I committed that change to the seminar source code. That includes everything we've done up until this point, and from now on I'm going to try to include a commit relatively often, so you'll be able to go and check on the repo and actually see these changes in the code. Okay, another thing I've just done is I have simply added this this big div. It wraps around everything else. It has two class names here. When you say class equals and you separate something by a space, you're really specifying two classes. Container fluid has to do with the bootstrap code, and site main is actually has to do with the CSS. So if we open up the CSS here, we can see that there is a site main. All it does is change the text align equal to center, and so what that's done to our thing is just move everything to the center there. And I'll go ahead and commit this now. Okay, so a couple more changes here, which you can see under the added header div button styled commit. Pretty simple here. First we added this header div right here and just put a title in there. And if we look at the CSS here, we actually have a little bit talking about the header, which adds a margin and stuff like that. And we can see the header, whoops, right here. So that's what we've added there. And then the other change that we made is we added we just changed the styling of this button, this first button we have here. We added this class equals button and button primary. These are each bootstrap classes, and again Bootstrap is included up here with this very first link here. And Bootstrap just includes a bunch of nice classes that look much better than regular JavaScript or regular HTML, and so that's why this button here looks much nicer than it did before. Okay, a couple of small changes, but it's starting to look a little less painful now. You'll notice first of all that I have these white spaces here, and these are, if we go to, let's see, close out of that. If we go to this line here, this div class equals well and well small, those, well, all three of these items here, well small, and row, are bootstrap entities, but this white space wrapping around here, that's called a well in bootstrap. So that helps to, well, first of all, it means our black text can show up against this background because it's no longer dark blue. It's also just a good way to visually separate. And each time I put that in, I've also wrapped it in a larger class main block, and then I've given it a specific name. So this is the main block console, this is the main block transactions, and then I have a, let's see here. Well, yeah, those are the two I have. And then the main block is, and when we go back to our CSS, this is again taken from the template, we have a main block entity. So and when we have a main block, the one important thing is the max width is 1100 pixels. That's why these, it doesn't stretch out for the whole length of the page, which would look a little weird. It sort of makes everything a little concise. Display block, I don't know exactly what that does, but it probably has to do with the arrangement of things inside of these. Let's see, what else? Oh, and then I just moved this transaction broadcasted to the bottom. It used to be above this stuff. And then finally, a lot of this interface is hidden. So if we look here, obviously in our interact, we should see a lot more stuff. It's not there because we haven't put a address of a subscription manager contract. So once we do that, we will see a whole bunch more stuff pop up, and our well automatically expands to include it. And even though we haven't actually changed anything inside here, it already looks a little bit better than our original. I'm not really sure where this weird box came from, so I'll have to look into that. But probably just some unintended consequence of the fact that we are using CSS code designed for some other site. But yeah, that's what we've done so far. I guess I haven't committed it yet, so you can just do that now with the git status and git add and then git commit, and we'll call this one some rearranging, I guess. Adding wells. Okay, that's good enough. Git push. Okay, so you guys should see that. Okay, so several changes going on here. So you can see I've rearranged quite a bit here. First of all, the create new subscription manager and the address input are both kind of visually separated from everything else because the user is going to have to do one of these two things. They're either going to have to give an address or create a new one to load all this stuff. And actually, I should just start out when there's nothing there, nothing shows up, which sort of makes sense because our dapp needs to have an address of a subscription manager to actually do something. So you put the address in here, and this stuff pops up just like it did in our functional, our earlier version, but now of course it looks much better. And then I've also split it in, we have some columns going on, and I'll go into the code and talk about how that's actually done. So let's see here, where are we? So we have an address input block here, and create. So all of this here is just this first part. So let's skip past that. And now here we start using these. This is a bootstrap class, call sm6, and a 6 I could put a 2 or a 3 or anything up to 12. And this is how bootstrap handles spacing. And so by saying that this column is a 6. You could sort of, the way Bootstrap handles it is it imagines that there's 12 sections horizontally, and so when you say 6, you're specifying half. And I guess just to demonstrate that, I could put a 4 in here and save and reload, and you'll see this first one gets a little bit shorter when I put the address in. See how this is shortened to fill up 4 of these imaginary sections here. So you can play with that. For now, I'm just going to leave it as half and half, so 6 and 6 of that 12. Let's see what else here. I've changed the headings. I used to just have an interact heading that covered all this stuff, but now I've visually separated it into a deposit and withdrawal. So this is all your like kind of wallet functionality here, and then billing. This is all the billing stuff, and a couple of things I still have to change. For example, this biller info. That's a header inside as well, and so because the header is being styled as white, that doesn't work very well. I could probably just take that out. Another thing I want to do eventually is make it to where this trigger bill button only shows up if you are a registered biller, and change biller rate. The only reason that's there right now is because I'm logged in as the owner of the contract. So yeah, we still got to work on this one a little bit. This one is looking okay. We might want to do some more stuff with that, but yeah, okay, moving on. Oh, and then one last thing there is that we have changed. You see, there's no area for the transaction broadcast. There used to be a section there, and here I've just added a v-if. So I'm having it only show up if there's this array of transactions actually has something in it. So because it's 0 right now, because we haven't sent anything, it's not showing up. As soon as I click on something and do some Web3, it should show up there at the bottom. I'm not going to demo it now because I don't want to worry about making any transactions, but that's why that's gone. And then of course we also have this nice feature where if there is no address, there's nothing here. So, okay, let's move on. Oh, and then one more thing here is that this well here, I've created a new class. So in the source code, whoops, I always do that. In the source code here, I've created a class called address input block, and then in the CSS, I've just defined it very similar to the main block, but I've made the max width much smaller. And so that's why this one is quite small. If I'd used the original one, it would have been as wide as this right here. Okay, and I've just now pushed everything I've done since the last push separated into a deposit, withdrawal, and biller panels. Okay, a minor change here having to do with, and this one actually does touch the Web3 code a little bit. Load the contract here. You'll notice that there's a bill button that's gone. And that's because I've made the button to only show up if the currently selected MetaMask user can actually bill the contract. And so if I go to change to Alice, I'll just demonstrate it and then I'll show the code. So if I change to test Alice and then I refresh the page, and then I put the address in here, contract address in here again, now I have this button, bill this SM contract. And another button has actually disappeared because I'm no longer signed in as the owner. I can't. There used to be a button here. If you go back a few seconds, you'll see a button here that's changes billing rate. That functionality we had, but it's new now that this button will appear or disappear depending on whether you can build a contract or not. And in the code, that just shows up. Well, here, let's see, billing. Here I just did another v-if, which again is a view function that conditionally shows or not shows something, and actually this should be a v show, not a v-if. I like using those more because then at least the element will always exist, but maybe just be hidden, whereas v-if will actually make it not exist, which can cause issues. So I'm going to change this one to v-show as well. Anyway, and so this v-show here, user can build, I added that into our view view object here. Here I just set it to false, and then I didn't do a computed one like I did for user is owner. I instead added it to this watch for when the contract instance changes. Here it calls the billers function, passing the user address this time, and then it gets the billing rate and weight per second. And then it says, okay, if it's greater than 0, then user can bill should be true. And if it's not greater than 0, then it should be false. So that's how that sets there. The reason that I did not make it a computed element is because this has to do a Web3 call here, which involves a callback. So I wasn't able to just strictly return something because it has to go through a callback. So instead I made it just a regular variable in the data and then I just changed it here, which of course is called whenever the SM contract instance is changed, which happens whenever we put an address in. Yep, that's it for that. And I'm also going to do a vshow here because this withdrawal button should really only be triggered if the user is owner. Save and fresh, and now since I'm logged in as not the owner, that withdraw button should go away. Let's just make sure it does. Put this in. Okay, no withdraw button. That's great. And you know, the withdraw button, it's important to keep in mind when we make those changes to hide certain buttons depending on which user's on MetaMask. I'm not doing that for security reasons. It's not like anybody could do the withdraw if they're not the owner and that button is still there. The contract would fail, or the contract execution. All our security is enforced in the smart contract itself. But given that the smart contract will fail if you're not registered as the owner and you try to withdraw, or you do something and in general you're just not the right user, so your smart contract will fail, you want to hide that functionality from the user in the interface so they never even get to those weird errors in the first place. All right, let's move on. Okay, I think I'm going to stop here for this video. So what we have now is, again, all the same functionality we had before on our older version, but it just looks a lot better. Things are grouped where they should be. If you click create, you still need to go to Etherscan and grab the address and put it in here. That would be nice to be done automatically, and it can be done automatically. But we've separated the deposit, sort of the wallet-like functionality on the left here, the billing functionality on the right. We have made it to where certain buttons will disappear if you're not the right user, or appear if you are the right user. But everything still works. You know, for example, I can take Alice's address here, the biller, plop it in here, and we'll get the billing rate. And here's another thing we have not yet done. These would be, obviously this should be a date, and the billing rate. Well, the billing rate's fine. That is displayed in ETH per month. Another thing we could output here is we could say current amount that's owed. You know, because you just have to multiply this number by however much time it's been since this timestamp, which would be a pretty simple thing to do. But anyway, this video we haven't really touched any of the functionality. We haven't really added any more intelligence to the interface. We've just visually separated everything, and I think I'll stop there. I think that in the next week of seminars, rather than jumping to a new cryptoeconomic primitive, I think we might keep working on this one and work on the interface, because we've talked about how to design a solidity. We've talked about how to sort of pull information from the contract into this interface, but there's a lot more that can be done here. I mean, just as one example, if we click create here, it'd be nice if this thing was automatically filled in when the transaction resolves and gets mined, and then this all automatically loads. And that's not as trivial as you might think. So that would be, but it would make the interface much better, because it would save the user from having to go to Etherscan. That's just one thing we can do. We can, as I said, we can have that output here about how much is currently owed. There's just a lot we can do with this interface. We could have this QR code here. Rather than just always being displayed, we could have just two buttons here, deposit with MetaMask and display QR code. That way you can click on either one you want, and it's sort of clean up this interface here. So yeah, I think we'll stop there, and then next week we will pick back up on this and add some more intelligence to this interface. All right, thanks guys for watching.